Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for coming for this grad student seminar, and thanks Anna for participate. She's Anna. She's from Ecuador. She's a PhD candidate in this department, in the agronomy department. Her research focuses on precision agriculture and particularly in nitrogen management in corn production. She did her master here at Purdue, and she did her undergrad in Zamorano University in Honduras. And after graduation, she wants to continue conducting research and developing tools to help farmers make better decisions while protecting the environment. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so first, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that by the end of this presentation, you can learn new things. So the overall, the topic of my presentation is the lessons learned from an on-farm precision nitrogen management project that we had from 2021 to 2023. So these are the topics for today. I divided this presentation into parts. Part one is more focused on some general concepts. So what is precision nitrogen management? And also because aerial images are a key component of precision agriculture, I want to show you how is that we get data from images. And I know that some of us are already familiar with these topics, but I want to make sure that all of us are on the same page. So I'm going to show you this. And then for the part two, I'm going to focus on the presenting the results from our precision nitrogen management project that we have from 2021 to 2023. And also I want to share with you what were the key lessons learned.
Smile out.
Thank you. Okay. So let's start with the first part of this presentation that is focused on what is precision nitrogen management. So first, some background. So whenever we think about grain yield, we can think about three components that are going to affect the final grain yield. So these are the genetics, we have the environment, and we also have the management. And imagine if you are a farmer and you know that these three components are going to affect the final yield. So what is the control that you have over these three components? In terms of the genetics, yeah, they can select the seed, the hybrid, right, that they want to use for their farm. But once those seeds are planted, there is nothing else that they can control. So this is out. So then the environment, that immediately we know that we cannot control. That is very uncertain. And yeah, we can predict some days, right, but ahead, but not the whole season. And then we have the management. So the management is the only component that farmers can have more control on. So within this management component, we have the nitrogen management. That is, nitrogen is an important nutrient for corn. So up to 25% of the cost is nitrogen fertilizer. So imagine this is a big component for farmers. So especially for this variable cost. But what is the concern about this is that up to 65% of the nitrogen that is out there can be lost to the environment. So if you think about how much money the farmers are investing on nitrogen, that is a high risk. So one of the key reasons of the nitrogen loss is because of the spatial variability of the fields. And here you have a picture of a field in a farmer's farm. And you can see that just the colors can tell you a lot of things about the soil. If you ever took an introduction to soil science class, you can know that, for example, the darker colors mean that probably there is more organic matter. The brown colors or the gray colors can tell us about the drainage in that field. So you can see there is a lot of variability in just one field. And what is the problem is that if the farmers normally apply one rate to the whole field, that means that those areas where there was probably a viable nitrogen there, if the plant doesn't use it, the one that the farmers apply, then it is going to be lost. So maybe you are familiar with this. Here is Acre, that is the farm that is 15 minutes away from here, so that you can see the spatial variability that we have at Acre is a lot. So, but yeah, I told you a lot of nitrogen can be lost, so it can leach from the soil with water, because the nitrogen is very interesting nutrient because it can take different form. So there, whenever, depending on the form that it has, and that is affected by the temperature, by the moisture, a lot of things. And whenever it rains, and it can leach the nitrogen, and that nitrogen is going to go, but where is that nitrogen going? So this is a map that shows the cropland. The green area shows the cropland in the in North America, and we are here, somewhere here. And you can see that is a lot of area of land that is farm, right? So a lot of nitrogen also is being lost from there. And this map shows the Mississippi River basin. So all that nitrogen is eventually going to end up here. That is called the hypoxic, well, it's the Gulf of Mexico, but there is a zone that is called the hypoxic zone that is linked directly to the nutrient runoff from all this area. And that causes this eutrophication. That is whenever we have a lot of nitrogen, and that promote the algal bloom. And as they die, they decompose and they take the oxygen, and that create conditions that are unable to support the most marine life. So that is why it's called dead zone. So I went to Google Earth and I was looking at this Mississippi basin, right? So here is Indiana, and you can see like this is the Mississippi River that crosses a lot of the states. And you can see it ends up here. This is the dead zone. So this is an image from Google Earth. And then this is an aerial picture that you can see, like, it looks bad, right? Okay, so why precision nitrogen management? This is not only to optimize the resources at the farm level, but it is also to maximize yield, but also to reduce the nitrogen loss to the environment. So, and how we do it? How precision agriculture works? It starts with data. Data can come from previous yield maps that you have in your farm that can tell you whether the zones with high yield, low yield. So everything for precision ag starts with the data. We can also use soil maps that are going, all this data is going to help us to understand our field and the variability in the field. We can have elevation maps and also data from sensors. So all this data is going to come into this decision support system. Here is where all the machine learning or statistical analysis or artificial intelligence can come. And the idea of using this is that the results can help us to make decisions and have this site-specific management so that we know where to apply, when to apply, and also how much to apply. And then the results are going to give us more data so that it's a cycle that can help us to keep improving. So for example, a farmer wants to start doing this precision nitrogen management. So how to start? The first step to do this precision agriculture is to understand the variability in the field, because if you remember, that is one of the main reasons of the nitrogen loss. So for that we do field mapping. And once we understand what are the zones in our field, we can do some soil testing so that we can understand more what are the underlying reasons of why is a high yielding zone and why this is not. And then one form of doing precision ag already is doing this split nitrogen application, for those that don't work with ag, precision, this split nitrogen application, instead of applying everything at once, we split that application so that we apply 1%, I don't know what, planting, and then the rest in season. So we use sensors to do this, to monitor the crop, and then do these in season adjustments to apply later during the season, the fertilizer. So from sensors to decisions. So we have a crop and soil sensors that can be installed in the field, and we also have these aerial imagery. So these are going to give us data that at the end is going to these decision support systems. So in my case, and something that I'm going to present later in the part 2 is based on aerial imagery. So that will take me to the next part, that is, how do we get data from images? Because I was very interested in learning using images for agriculture when I came to Purdue. And my professor told me, we have a drone and we are going to use it for research. So in my mind, whenever he said about images, I was imagining, I don't know, the color or things that we see in the images. But it was not what I thought. And that's why I want to share with you today, like how it works, like the basics. And everything starts with the plant. So the plant interacts with the light from the sun in different ways. It can be reflect, it can be transmit, and also it can be absorbed by the plant. And this concept is very important because depending on the status of the plant, it is going to reflect that light in different ways. For example, a healthy plant is going to reflect a lot of green. That is why we see that plants are green, because that is the light that is being reflected. Then when the plant is stressed, that green is not being reflected because the chlorophyll is the one that, well, I'm not going to go into the details because I'm going other way. So, but everything is about that light that is reflected. And the sensor that is mounted on the drone or a satellite is what captures that a reflection from the plant and stores as in the case of cameras, it stores in the images. So if you ever zoom in a picture, we are going to see pixels, right? So that each individual pixel is going to have those numbers that reflect this. It's not just one picture, you know. If you put that picture in a program, you're going to see what is for red, what is for green, what is for blue. And there are multispectral sensor or hyperspectral sensor that are going to give us more layers of that explain more. So then we use these numbers, digital numbers that are called as to calculate vegetation indices or plant health indices that are going to tell us the status of the plant. So we go from having an image to having data that we can use to make decisions. So how can we use this data from the images? This can help us to see the optimum rate of a specific product. In our case, is nitrogen fertilizer. So for example, I apply different rates in a field. And then I get for that specific rate, the NDVI, that is one of the indices that we use. And then I say, okay, after 150 pounds of nitrogen, the NDVI was the same. So I say, okay, this was the optimum rate. And remember this because this is the basis of the project that we conduct. So how can we use these images can help us to assess high and low vegetation in our field, but we have to be very careful because sometimes we see, oh, there is an area that has low NDVI, so we need to apply more nitrogen. But it's always important to go and check and make sure, because maybe there is no plants there. And that is something that happens because there are providers for farmers that they gave them a login so that they can see the fields. But you know, the people that is, I don't know, thousands of miles away, they don't know what's happening. And in the maps that they show to the farmers, it says that it has low biomass or that is in stress, but actually there are no plants there. So that is something that is important to take in consideration. We can also use this aerial imagery to identify zones with different crop performance over time. And that can help us to understand, and once we identify zones, we can understand better what are the causes. We can go deeper and see, okay, why this is like this. And ideally, we can integrate all of these so that we can identify zones, we can do a soil test, and then during the season, we can have this real-time data of the crop status. Okay, now I'm going to move to the second part of this presentation that is about our own farm nitrogen project. So I have three sections here, just a general overview, the results focused on yield, and also the results focus on the economic part, because if we want a farmer to adopt something, it's not just the yield, they need to know in numbers, is this convenient for me or not? So there is a lot of nitrogen loss, right? So we know that these post-emergent citrus applications, when the plants are already there, whenever we apply there, that this can reduce the nitrogen loss and improve the nitrogen uptake. So, okay, but now how much should the farmers apply for this citrus application? So with the University of Minnesota, we developed a strategy to provide a tool for farmers to identify how much nitrogen to apply at citrus. And this strategy was called the remote sensing and calibration strip-based precision nitrogen management strategy. But from now on, I will just say our strategy versus the farmer's practice. So this has three parts. The first part is before planting or early growth stages. I asked the farmer, what is your normal rate? He said, or she said, 200 pounds. And then based on that, we define multiple nitrogen rates based on that. And we apply these rates in plots that go around run across the length of the field. Then at growth stages B7, B8, that is when the plant has like 7 to 8 leaves with a color. Then we subdivide our field in smaller blocks, each block with all those rates. And then here's when we use the satellite imagery. So we are going to calculate based on this strategy, we use NDVI. For each individual block, we are going to do this nitrogen response curve. So for each individual block, we are going to identify what is the optimal nitrogen rate. And then for citrus, we are going to apply what is needed to reach that optimum in those areas that don't have that optimum yet. So in theory, that is how this works. But it's important always to test these strategies in farmers' field, because in the university, we can have a lot of ideas of things that we want to do, and in theory, they work great, but we need to take them to the field, because there are a lot of things that once you test them, you're like, this is not that practical, or things can happen. So that was the main objective of this NRCS funded project, to test this strategy in different conditions in Indiana and Minnesota. And the specific objectives, of course, was to quantify the agronomic, environment, and economical benefits. So for Indiana, we had 20 nitrogen trials in 5 different counties: Marshall, White, Clay County, Du Bois, and Randolph. And we have different conditions in terms of previous crop and tillage system. So, okay, it was 2021, and I was told, okay, we're going to do this project. And I was the one in charge of getting in contact with the farmers and setting up the experiment. So whenever I contact a farmer that was interested in working with us, the first thing that I would ask him was, okay, what is your normal rate? And then based on that, we would define these different treatments. So this is one trial in Marshall County. And the plot dimension would be equivalent to the nitrogen applicator of each farm. Then depending on the size of the field, we would have 3 or more replications. For today's presentation, I'm going to focus on comparing the overall our strategy, the precision nitrogen management strategy, versus the farmer's practice. So during 3 years, we collect different data, that soil samples, plant samples, remote sensing data, and also we got water samples. So before planting, we got some soil samples. Before citrus, we got some plant samples, soil samples, aerial imagery, water samples too. At silking, we got also the tissue samples and aerial imagery. And maturity, we had a soil plant, and grain yield too. But for today's presentation, I'm going to focus, because it's a lot, this project was a lot, so I could not present all the results in today's presentation, so I'm focusing on grain yield. So now let's see what were the results. Does this strategy work? It doesn't work, what happened? So I'm going to focus on the difference in total nitrogen used and yield, because at the end, what we want is to reduce that nitrogen use, right? And with our strategy, ideally, we would increase the yield, or at least don't reduce the normal yield. So for the difference in total nitrogen, I'm comparing our strategy versus the farmer's practice. So ideally, we want a negative number because we want a reduction in nitrogen use, right? And for the yield, ideally, we want an increase, or at least not a negative number. So, okay, for nitrogen, we want a reduction. And for yield, we want an increase, or at least close to zero. So in this figure, I'm going to show you the results from all our drugs. And ideally, for nitrogen, we want a reduction, right? Okay, so these were the results in terms of nitrogen. We were able to reduce the nitrogen rate in a lot of the locations. But now, what about the yield? I remember we don't want anything in this part. And we have a lot. So what happened? And there are cases in which we were able to reduce the nitrogen uptake and don't affect the yield. So in order to understand better what is happening, why it works in some locations, why it didn't work in other locations, we separate all our trials in different groups based on the location. Because depending on the location we will have a different environment, different type of parent material, so all of that. Okay, and before that, here I have a map that shows the departure from the mean of the accumulated precipitation between the whole growing season, from April to October 31st. So all colors that are green to blue means that there was above the mean. So it was a good year, let's say. We had enough rain. But those colors that are yellow to red, that means that it was dry. It was below the normal. So here you can already see, like there we have fields that had a variety of weather during these 3 years. And I'm going to, just because of the time, I cannot go through each location. So I'm going to pick key examples so that we can understand what's happening. So this is an ideal scenario. We reduce the nitrogen yield. We reduce the nitrogen use and don't affect the grain yield. So I have these two cases. So let's see, in this table, I have the treatment, and then I have nitrogen that we applied before citrus. If we look at this will be based on those percentages. So you can see that it goes from low to high. In this case, we have another example, but just focus on this. And then here is the total nitrogen that we use at the end. So this includes the before citrus and whatever we apply later. So you can see it go from 158 to 210. That is almost 50 pounds in difference. And if you look at the yield, we were able to reduce the nitrogen use without affecting the yield. So that is a good example. You see there was no difference. So that was a good case. This is another example, the same thing. This is the total nitrogen use. Yeah, we were able to reduce the nitrogen and without affecting the yield. Okay, what is the common thing in these two fields? This is the accumulated precipitation that year. And you can see those were in areas that had a good precipitation, like no problems, no, it was not dry. Because the water and the soil moisture is very important, because once the nitrogen is there, it needs to go to the plant. It's dry, it cannot move, you know. And now let's see the other examples. This is a case where we did not even reduce the nitrogen, but we reduced the yield. In this case, you can see that it is in an area that was a little dry. So in this case, we see before citrus, this is the total nitrogen applied. And you see, we were not able to reduce the nitrogen, but look, 190 and 195 applied, and look at the difference in yield. So there was a decrease in yield. Why happened is there are a lot of factors, because the locations are different, the management is different, the seeding rate is different, a lot of things, but the only thing in common across these locations was the weather. So the takeaway is that we need we need rain, because the weather is important first. Before citrus, we apply these different nitrogen rates, and at the end, we're using images to create this nitrogen response. But if we apply different rates, expecting to see a response, but it doesn't rain, it's dry, there is not going to be an effect on those, we're not going to see anything, it's just everything is the same. So that is why we were not able to reduce the nitrogen. Here you see, we were not able to reduce the total, because we didn't see anything. Okay, before citrus, it's important to identify the response. And after citrus, it's important to mobilize that citrus application to, like that nitrogen that we apply in citrus, to the plants. And there was a case in one field that we were able to see the response, but then it was dry. I think it was 2022. It was dry, so we applied the nitrogen rates at citrus, and then the farmer told me, I'm going to apply, because then it's going to be too late to apply with this equipment that we have. But it's very dry, he thought. And at the end, we saw the results. It was not good. So the main takeaway from this part is that if a farmer asks me, do you think I should use this strategy in my field? The first thing that I would ask him or ask her is that, do you have irrigation, or is just rainfed? And if they say it's rainfed, I say it's too risky. So I would not recommend it. Now, in terms of the economic results. So for the profit, I consider the income, that would be the yield by the corn price, and also the cost. The cost include the fertilizer cost and also the application cost. So in the best scenario, in which we decrease the nitrogen use and we keep the same yield or improve it, I have two examples here. We decrease the nitrogen use and the yield stays similar. So we're going to see these examples. Here, I want you to focus on the total nitrogen use and the average yield for the farmer's practice and for the strategy that we test. You can see that compared to the farmer's practice, we were able to reduce some nitrogen per acre. So imagine this is about 11 pounds of nitrogen per acre. If a farmer does, I don't know, dozens of acres, that is a lot of, they are losing a lot of nitrogen. And the yield stay the same. But if we consider the application cost, this strategy involves an extra application. If they apply just once, that's it. And we are telling them to apply one extra time, we also need to include that extra cost of the nitrogen application. So whenever we do this profit comparing the two farmers practice and the precision nitrogen strategy, there is still not in terms of money, they are not gaining. And the same thing here, we were able to reduce the total nitrogen, but because of the extra pass of the extra application, they were not able to improve their profit. So the nitrogen cost plays an important role too. But for example, this is with this price of nitrogen. But let's say that the nitrogen gets very expensive. So maybe saving those 10 pounds of nitrogen can justify that extra application. For example, let's say I know that I'm going to expend $10 extra, but I can reduce $100 of you. So I'm saving $90, something like that. But let's say I'm going to pay $10 extra for an application, but I'm for just $2 extra. So it's not convenient. So the application cost of the extra pass of nitrogen must be justified. And this one is important, is that for this strategy, the farmers need to do an extra application of nitrogen. And something that I learned during this project is that if we want farmers to adopt precision nitrogen or precision agricultural strategies, we need to focus on operational efficiency, because there is a time in the summer where the farmers are so busy because the plants grow fast and they need to take decisions. So give them something extra to do is not convenient for them. Even though they can save nitrogen, there is a balance, so operational efficiency is a key factor if we want farmers to adopt new strategies. Another thing that I realized during this project is that the spatial variability varies from field to field. Like even fields that are next to each other, one field can be a uniform and other field can not be uniform. So I think that a first step before trying precision nitrogen management strategy, the first step would be to have a strategy that can tell us, based on the conditions of this field, is it convenient to test this strategy? It's important to add a first step in which we can determine whether a field will benefit or not from a variable nitrogen rate application. So overall, the lessons learned is that first, the rainfall is key to make this strategy work. So it's risky for rain-fed fields. The money, that's important too. The second, application cost must be justified. Operational efficiency is key. It's super important for farmers to use the new strategies. And there is important to do more research, I think, to find ways to know whether a field can benefit or not from using variable nitrogen rate. And this project involved a lot of collaboration with the farmers and a lot of data collection. So you can see me, I would not have been able to get all the data by myself. So I wish I could have more pictures here, but all these people helped me to collect the data and make this work possible. So I'm very grateful for all of them. And with that, thank you so much for your attention, and I would love to take any question.
I got one.
Yeah.
Considering that the farmer use irrigation, do you think it's possible to use this strategy like gathering the data 1 year and using the results on the next year? So we got like just one application and reduce the costs and try to have more yield?
Do you mean like trying 1 year to see how it works and get data from that, and then the next year deciding whether to do it based on whether it works or not? Yeah, definitely. And that's the idea of testing the strategies to see if something works or not. Is that what it was?
It's just because you gather the data on the same year and use it on the same year, like in the same crop, right? And that's why you need the second application. I was thinking like to doing just one application, but on the next year, based on the data from the previous year.
Yeah, that is interesting. I haven't thought about it, but yeah, that would be something to try. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was, maybe you already said somewhere, maybe I missed. I was curious, how did you define like how much percentage to add when you ask farmers like how much nitrogen they had applied? Do you also have like soil samplings done, right? Like there might be already nitrogen in there.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so I was just curious about that.
Mhm. So according to the strategy, the idea is to is to just need satellite imagery to do this. So based on the strategy, we don't get any other input for taking the decision. But for this project, we did we went and we got samples because it's important to understand what is already there. Because whenever we were trying to understand why some fields were react one way and other fields not, that data that we collect before help us a lot because we get their organic matter, the pH, and those are factors that can affect the nitrogen. So we don't, but it's definitely important to get. Thank you.
Can you tell us about your experience, like, of reaching out to farmers, like, it was difficult to convince them for you to do this work, or can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So ideally we were trying to find 10 locations per year. And we were able to get 6 to 7 every year, not the 10. So that already told us that some farmers are not, it's not easy to convince them. So one lesson learned from the first year is that we need to start looking for farmers not by April or March, but from the year before. So what we did in 2022 was, even in 2021, at the end of the year, we were already start talking about some of the results and asking if people were interested, and that helped us to get more people involved. So that was the first thing, to reach farmers way before, like, don't do it like on February. If possible, do it before. I think that one of the key things with working with farmers is that something that I learned is that I need to be concise. Whenever I talk to them, I need to go to the point. I need to make sure that we are on the same page, that the farmers are aware of these are the objectives, this is what we expect from you in terms of data, and this is what you can expect from me. So because it's never a good idea to assume something. Never, never, never. And always double check with them. Communication was super important because it was not like in the Purdue farms that I could go, I always had to send them a message or call them like, hey, let me know whenever the plants are, whenever the plants emerge, or tell me when they are approaching B4, B5 so that we can go and do the sampling. And at the beginning, it was I had to go out of my comfort zone because I didn't want to talk to them because they didn't understand me. They didn't, and I didn't understand them either. So I remember I didn't want to call them, but I had to do it. Like, I had no choice. So, and I don't know if they got better at understanding me with the other years because we collaborate with the same farmers. So, but it was a great experience, and at the end, working with them, I love it because I was able to understand what is important for them, right? Because sometimes there are things that we think that are important because, for example, we focus on the nitrogen loss and the environment, but being with them helped me to see like practical things like the operational efficiency and other factors that are important to consider when we develop these precision nitrogen strategies.
I have a question. Wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for all the work that you did. From
I'm just curious, this is more like a curiosity. From all the projects that you did, all the variables that you included, all the analysis that you did, what's something that if you were to repeat this project, what variables or analysis you want to include that will like either like give you more knowledge of what's happening at the farm or at the fields, or just understand why you're not getting that yield, you're not like reducing that nitrogen loss, so.
Yeah, definitely. I would like to. I wish I would have used soil moisture sensors and maybe have in at least two places these weather stations, so that we can have a better understanding of the weather and for the so in the soil we can use temperature and moisture sensors, because that can help us to know what is happening in the soil, what conditions are happening. And we got some samples at the before planting and then at citrus, but what happened in between, like we don't know. So maybe having those sensors can help us to do some modeling to understand what was happening in between that could have caused the difference between the different locations. So I would definitely would have used some sensors. And we always want more data, right? So I wish I could have collected in more samples between at different growth stages during the vegetative period to see what was happening in terms of nitrogen uptake, and compare that with aerial imagery, because we are assuming that this is telling us the like the response to the nitrogen rates, but there are other factors happening. So yeah, more data. Thank you.
Someone has a question in this one,
Yeah, that's-
but there.
Uh,
There you
Hi,
Hi.
presentation. Sorry, I didn't get your first part of the presentation, so probably you answered this question. But my question is, so you mentioned that climate impacted your experiment. Could you explain a little bit how that happened? Like we had climate varying. There are times we had very high drought. Then there was times when it was very rainy and heavy storms. So did you see the impact of the differences in those climatic conditions in your experiment?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for the question. So definitely the weather is what impact the most our strategy, because our strategy involves the application of different nitrogen rates, and then we expect to see a response to those nitrogen rates so that we can see, oh, this was the optimum. But for example, for the places that were dry, whenever we did this response curve, it was something like this. It was flat, there was no response. And that happened because you know that in order for the nitrogen to reach the plant, we need water, we need moisture. So whenever it doesn't rain, the dry conditions doesn't allow that nitrogen to go to the plant, and we are not able to see that response. So that is why the weather was a key factor for this strategy. Before citrus, so that we can see the response, and after citrus, so that whatever we apply to reach that optimum can actually get into the plant.
I have a question. What are the soil conditions and like the similar things in between for you to choose those fields?
That's a good question, because we were looking for farmers. So the idea was to have a variety of conditions, different farms. So that is something that we were not choosing, like picking specifically a farmer. Oh, you have these conditions, yeah, you can work with us. Any farmer that wanted to get involved, it was great, because we could see the response to this strategy over a range of different farm conditions.
Okay.
But we have different types. For example, in the north, we had soils that have coarser soil texture. Like here, around here, we have a soil with medium to fine texture. So it was a lot, a high variety of soil.
Okay, and for the
varieties of corn?
Mhm. That depends on the farmer too.
Okay, so it's not your decision.
No, it's not. But actually that is good because whenever you're testing a product or a strategy, you want to see how your strategy or your product fit to that farmer operation.
Yeah.
So it would be kind of biased to say, you need to use this, you need to do this, because we want to see, okay, how it works in this operation. So that the farmer can see, oh, this work, we can, yeah, this is good for me. But if I ever adjust something there, he's like, yeah, this year worked, but next year I cannot do that, so I'm not going to use this.
Thank you. I have just a small.
No, go ahead.
But it's related to this. So did they have like any incentive? Like, did they receive like any money or something?
Yeah, so the farmers, because there is an extra application that they have to do, the farmers receive some money for getting involved that would cover that time and the equipment, the application. And then there was also an amount for the crop advisor that work with the farmer, because this involves a lot of data from the machine. So the farmer had to give me the data, and then usually the farmer just give the data, and then the crop advisor would put it in a shapefile format or something like that, that give it to me. Or we need the as applied data from the equipment, from the applicator, so the crop advisor will be the one that is. And also, because there was a potential for yield loss, they also receive compensation for that loss.
Yeah, and it was a really nice presentation, I like it. And I think, and it's not a question, it's just more really, what do you think? Because now you were testing two different approaches, your techniques and also what the farmer is using. Do you think that in case that maybe the farmer was okay, maybe he was calculating with his natural rate, or maybe you were good? You don't know because you had only two approach. Do you recommend to use in the future research to include more tools or more decision support tool to calculate nitrogen?
Yeah, definitely. That is so ideally we would test more things, right? But sometimes for agronomic research, we need to have replications, right? And the more treatments we have, the size of the field was not enough. So sometimes, for example, in Minnesota, they had larger fields. So they test different strategies that would calculate, that would apply what was the optimal based on other things. So they would have, because they have more space, they can fit more replications, like more treatments. But in our case, we had one treatment with the farmer's strategy, and another would be just the 100% of what he applies. And there was different between, because the farmer strategy would apply a starter fertilizer, for example, and we wouldn't. We would apply the 100, everything there. But in some fields, there was not enough space, so we couldn't have this farmer practice. We just have the 100%. So in a few fields, that happened because, so a limitation sometimes with working in farmers fields is the space.
Thanks.
Thank you.
There's another question in this.
See.
Yeah, thank you. I was wondering, what satellite data did you use and how did you use it?
So we use a we use satellite imagery that has 3 meters resolution. It's multispectral, so it had the near infrared band, and it comes from Planet Imagery, Planet Labs. And whenever you have an academic account, you can get free imagery from there.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now that the graduate student questions are done, I'd like to. So it's been dry. Extremely dry, right? And I've lived a few more decades than all of you. This weather that you've experienced has been very strange as compared to what you would typically expect. So if it remains dry through this fall into the spring, I understand in the more semi-arid regions of the country, they go down deep in terms of nitrogen contribution. Is that true? In the semi-arid regions that take into account nitrogen where they have less rainfall? Would you recommend a deep sampling if we get into an extremely dry fall, dry winter, and we haven't put on nitrogen? Would there be any reason to go deep to see how much nitrogen is in the zone?
So based on what I understand, is that the plant uptake is happening on the most of the plant uptake is happening on the top. So if I think like the top, the surface is here, and I want to get nitrogen that is too low, maybe the plants would not even get it. And if it is dry, the water also helps the plants to develop root systems. And so even for developing roots, it may be a challenge. So I would think that it would not be, if I have resources, yes. But if I don't, I would focus on other factors.
What was the expectations of tar spot control of these farmers? The disease?
Well, yeah, so she works with that, but.
I know she did. She did a nice paper in my class.
So, I would go to the fields to get drone imagery, and I would always go to the key points within the field. So, and then I would report whatever I saw to the farmers, right? And they like it. So, anytime, whenever it was approaching like BT, like flowering, I would start saying in all the fields I saw tar spot. So I would tell them, hey, I saw this, and they would say, oh yeah, we're planning to apply in 1 week or something. So all of them apply around BT or 1. But in all the fields I saw tar spot.
Is water quality improving in the Gulf of Mexico?
Well, I know that there are a lot of programs and a lot of funding for strategies that can help this, but I also learned that there is something that is called legacy nitrogen, something like that. So even though we think that all the nitrogen is coming from the fields, and if we improve, if we conduct these strategies that reduce the nitrogen use, we are going to reduce the nitrogen in the Gulf of Mexico.